it says, when the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other was Puah. And he said to them, when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stools, if it is a son, then you shall slay him. But if it is a daughter, then she will live. Here's the scenario. He tried giving the Israelites grievous and burdensome toil and hard-working conditions, and they expanded, which wasn't what he wanted. Then he doubled up on the rigors and made it worse for them, but they continued to grow, and his result that he wanted did not take place. So now he takes up another tactic. So his next tactic is this. We're going to go to the Hebrew midwives and get them to go against and turn on their own people and take away the boys who are born to the Hebrew women. So here's what he's doing. He's going to these Hebrew midwives, these two. They're like head nurses, and they facilitate the birth process, bringing the children into life. And they sort of oversee a bunch of nurses. So he tells them, I want you that every time one of your own children that is a male is born, we want you to slay it. He's trying to get the people of Israel to turn against their own people. He already got the Egyptians to turn against the Israelites. But now, in order to be effective, because he hasn't been so far, he believes that trying to get people of Israel recruited so that he can use them to bring about his ends with them. So here's what he's doing. He wants to take people from among the oppressed and allow them to be the facilitators of bringing about his agenda by having them go against their own people. He's trying to persuade Israel to go against their own people, or people in Israel to go against their own people. This is insanity. But the reality is, we see it happen all the time. He's trying to get them to work against their own benefits. He's trying to get them to work against their own interest. This is what he tried to do with Israel and with these two ladies. And he felt that he could attempt, or I'm assuming he felt that he could intimidate them to do what it is he's asking. He's asking these two women to manage the other midwives to the degree that they would go to their own women who are pregnant and having children, and to take the male born kids and to slay them, and to this way reduce the Israelite population. But it says here in verse 17, but the midwives feared God. The midwives feared God, and they did not do what the king commanded them to do, but they saved all of the male children of Israel alive. They refused to do it. They refused to do it. They feared God. Whenever somebody who comes to power who considers himself an agent of change, who considers himself a disruptor, who considers himself above everything. Whenever they start trying to become tyrannical, whenever they start trying to become authoritarian, whenever they become grossly and cruelly oppressive to people, they never end with their objectives. They always prey on the weak. They prey on the poor. They prey on the disenfranchised. They prey on those that don't look like them, that don't live like them, that don't act like them, talk like them, smell like them. They prey on the weak. But what they don't know is that when you oppress people, you end up spreading them out, and you end up increasing their numbers. Because these kind of men are evil, and they never know that they are or realize that they are fighting ultimately against God. In this scenario right here, these midwives, two ladies, it says they wouldn't do what he said to do. They wouldn't do what he said. Two women, two Israelite women stood in the gap between this wicked king and her entire people. She refused to take the lives of any of her own flesh and blood born amongst them. And it says because they feared God. They feared God more importantly than they feared this king of Egypt. This is what happens. Now, so when it was discovered that they weren't slaying these people, it says the king of Egypt called for the midwives, and he said to them, "Why have you done this thing? Why have you disobeyed my command to end the lives of these male babies, Israelite babies? Why have you done this thing and saved these children alive?" And so they said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women, listen to this, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are lively and they give birth before the midwives even get to them. So, in a nutshell, these women, these midwives, they lied. They lied to this Pharaoh. And we just got through hearing how they feared God, but they feared God enough to lie to Pharaoh about why none of the male children were slain. This is what happens. It says therefore God dealt well with these midwives, and the people multiplied and grew mightily. So here we go again. Pharaoh thought he thought he could turn the minds of the people of Israel against the people of Israel to serve his purpose. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? I know it does, because this guy spineless toad is proving my point exactly. So, and I haven't even mentioned anything about who he's talking about. But yet, he's making the connection as he should make. And the name, my friend, is suitable. It is suitable for you, and it is suitable for the one you're talking about. Now, when it says that God therefore dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew mighty, again, the Pharaoh, this king's, his plan is flouted again. The disruptor is the one whose plans are being disrupted. And it's being disrupted by people who fear God. Who fear God. And so my thoughts are on this are that plan, the way God works, what he does, how he deals with oppressors and tyrannical people and insane people hasn't changed. It hasn't changed. Every one of these men who has been like this throughout history, they've all met with their demise in very ignominious ways. And deservedly so. But even here, when he tries his plan with the midwives, it fails. And we're told again that the Israelites multiplied and they grew very mighty as a people. Verse 21 of Exodus 1. And so it was, because the midwives feared God, that he, meaning God, provided households for them. And without getting into too much detail, how God provided for them, what it means when it says that God provided for them households, it meant that he just built up their house. In other words, he blessed them with large families. He blessed them with children. He blessed them with individual growth within their own family life. He blessed them. And that was important to the Israelites at that time. Family was very important. And so having numerous children and numerous relatives was a big part of their culture, like many cultures in the early times. So in verse 22, we get to the end here, because now Pharaoh, after having tried 2 or 3 different phases of ways to exploit Israel and to shrink their numbers and to impose upon them the rigors of a slave-like life, Pharaoh, realizing that his plans, plural, have all been failures, as we're going to see in the situations that we are going through, Pharaoh commanded all his people, all the Egyptians. And here's where he takes it to another level. So first, all of his plans failed. So now he's going for broke. It says he commanded all of the Egyptians, saying to them that every son who is born of Israel, you shall cast into the Nile River, and every daughter you will save alive. So first, his plan was, we're just going to oppress them. Put some hard labor on them. Put their men to work. Put them out in the fields and have them work day and night, so they won't be at home copulating. That didn't work. So they stepped it up and made it even more rigorous, to wear them out physically, to drain them of life, to try to break their backs, break their wills, humiliate them, embarrass them. All these things. And then it says that even after that second wave of cruel punishment for nothing, it did not have the result that the Pharaoh desired, which was to shrink their numbers, to keep them from growing, to keep them from having males born. So when that didn't work the second time, Then he decided, well, now let's go see if we can go and recruit some of the Hebrews to carry out our plans against the Hebrews. Let's go recruit the midwives and have them facilitate the slaying of the boys born amongst their own families. But those midwives refused to do it because they feared God. They feared God more than they feared the Pharaoh. So Pharaoh comes to them and says, what's going on here? I gave you a command to destroy the boys that are born to all of your women, and it hasn't been happening. So the women said, well, it just so happens that as soon as they get pregnant, as soon as they're due, the babies just flop out. They're so strong that they come out before we can get to them, so we can't get rid of them. Well, that didn't set right with him. So now his third attempt to dismantle Israel and to reduce their numbers and to stop their population, boom. Now he gets really angry. He gets really angry because you can't get the Israelites to turn against themselves. So now he goes back to his Egyptian people, his Egyptian folks. And he puts them in place and he tells all of them, he says, if you see a male Israelite born anywhere, you have the right to go and get that child and throw him into the Nile River. Do not let another Israelite man be born. If you see one on the street, you see one at the store, you see one at the park, you see one anywhere, see one in his mother's arms, snatch him away, toss him into the Nile River. That's what he said. Exodus chapter 1, verse 22. Destroy them all. All the boys. Destroy them all. Pharaoh commanded all of his people, saying, every son who is born, you shall cast him into the Nile, and every daughter you will save alive. This was his agenda. And desperate he did get, Earth. He did get desperate. But here's the thing. That's the end of that passage. That's the end of Exodus chapter 1. And when I was reading this, I could not help but to draw significant parallels between this king and the one that we have now as a king. Everything that we see being done has already been done. This chapter proves there is nothing new under the sun. This chapter proves that the Bible is always right. It shows us the model for every form of wickedness that can be done under the sun. It's here in the Word of God. As long as there are people living in this country who fear God, the outcomes that are going to take place in this country are going to be those that glorify Him. And His people, the true believers in God, the true faithful souls, when they get involved in any aspect of what is going on in society, because we fear God, we are not going to do those things which go contrary to godliness. And this is what the downfall is of tyrannical oppressors and authoritarian figures. The fact of the matter is, they always lose. They never win. They never win. Never. And while I know and understand that so many people are frustrated and upset about what's going on in the world, in here, in America, anywhere, fear God. Fear him. He will take care of everything. Believe me, there is nothing to be concerned about. And even though there may be things that get us riled up and stir us up and cause fear, understand something. Direct your fear toward God, and he will take care of everything for us all. Glorify him. Seek his ways. Seek to please him. And he is sure to hear you. Because he's always going to look after his people like he did with the Israelites in Exodus. And here's the thing. At this point, they would go on for another 400 years dealing with this stuff. 400 years. And over that period of time, the Israelites continue as a nation to grow and to grow and to grow and to grow. Until they had vast numbers. As God had promised Abraham they would have. The promise that God made to Abraham that the Israelites would be as the number of the sand of the sea and the stars in the sky. Those verses or those passages where we see promises that were made to the nation of Israel, they've all been fulfilled. They've been fulfilled. What he promised to the physical, earthly nation of Israel have all been fulfilled. So, even after this Pharaoh ruled and tried to subject them to bondage, which he did do, this went on for 400 plus years until God raised up Moses. And when God raised up Moses, they were a vast body of people, the Israelites were. And he would lead them on the Exodus. And they'd be in that wilderness for 40 years. And as they continued to have this battle, just before they were able to leave, they were being attacked over and over again by the Pharaoh at that time, up until the time where he was forced to let them go after God sent his final plague, which was to massacre the firstborn of all those in Egypt, be animals as well as humans. This Pharaoh here, he only wanted to have all of the male sons slain. But by the time it was over, it would be God who would slay all of the firstborn of Egypt, of the Egyptians. All of the firstborn, male or female, and of all the animals and livestock. Whatever animal or human was the firstborn, they would be slain by the destroying angel that God himself sent. Yes, that God sent. And even after all of the firstborn being slain, when Pharaoh had nothing else that he could do, he decided to let them go. To let them go. And when he said, and when he negotiated, basically, it wasn't a negotiation, but in Pharaoh's mind it was. Moses says, we need to go. And Pharaoh was like, well, you can go a little while out, or you can go a while, but then come back. You go out there and worship and come back. And then he goes later on and he says, well, you can go, but you can't take your stuff. You can't take the animals. You can't take the livestock. And then Moses came back and says, no, we're going to go and we're going to take everything. We're taking everything that was ours, everything that we took care of, everything that that belonged to us. We're going to take that and go with us. Which, by the way, is how you can know that they were not slaves the way we in America understand American slavery, where people could buy and trade and exchange people and trade humans and and do what they did to Africans in America. This was not what the Israelites went through. They had a lot of rigorous things that they had to undergo, but they had homes, their own homes in their own territory that they could go to. But the state, the government, was imposing upon them all of these grievous burdens to make it impossible for them to pay the tribute that they would be exacting against the Israelites. So basically, they wanted to make the work impossible to do, so that it is impossible for them to pay tribute to the state and pay their due. So you end up having an endless cycle. Continue to work harder. We make it harder for you to work. Oh, and by the way, we're going to take the straw out of the mix so that you have to work even harder to make mortar and all these kinds of things. So he wanted to make it absolutely impossible for them to achieve any measure or modicum of success. But they did over time. And one of the reasons why you know that they were not slaves in the sense of American slavery like it was here is because when they left Egypt, they took all their stuff with them. Stuff that they had accumulated over the last 430 years. So they had livestock. They were with their families. All their families were together. They were always together in their community. They weren't dispersed out. They were all together at all times. They had homes. But the Pharaoh made it impossible for them to live a comfortable life. And I'm not saying it was easy. I'm not saying there was no suffering. But what I am saying is that it wasn't like how so many people make it in movies and TV shows and things of that nature. So it was bad, but it wasn't like what took place here. So anyway, after the last promise that God made against Pharaoh to slay the firstborn, then Israel was finally allowed to leave. Pharaoh was compelled to let them go. And even after all they went through, when Moses was headed toward the Red Sea without knowing where he was going, Pharaoh began to start another chase. After all of the plagues, up to and including and especially the slaying of the firstborn, even in his own household, he still decided with his obstinate and hardened heart to chase after Israel. But this time, it would be his last time. And he chased after. He had his 600,000 chariots, I believe it was, 600,000 charioteers. They went after them. The Israelites went through the parted Red Sea on dry ground. And after the last soul got across the other side, the Egyptians looked about after the cloud that separated the Israelites from the Pharaoh's army. When the cloud moved away from the rear and went back to the front, then Pharaoh must have thought that the parted Red Sea was some kind of a natural phenomena. He must have thought it had something to do with climate change. But he ran in. He sent his 600,000 charioteers into the basin of the Red Sea that was dry. And God waited until they all got in the middle of the Red Sea, all of them. And then he allowed the water to return to its natural form, and it crushed and broke every single one of Pharaoh's army and destroyed them all. And the Israelites went on to the promised land, those whom God chose to enter in. And so I hope that Exodus chapter 1 gives you some insight into some of the things that are going on today. And I hope that you can look through it and see that there is hope for people to know that, believe me when I tell you, you can have all the headaches and all the frustration for what you see happening in the world today. But be assured of this one thing. The Lord God, the Lord Jesus Christ, will set it straight. Be provoked and be persuaded.